The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in our quiet suburban neighborhood of Willowbrook Heights. I was sipping my coffee on the back deck, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across my meticulously maintained half-acre property when I heard the first power tool fire up next door. At 6:47 a.m., my name is Marcus Chen, and I've lived at 247 Maple Street for 8 years. 8 peaceful, blissful years where my biggest concern was whether to plant hostas or ferns along the shaded north border of my yard. I'm a software engineer who works remotely, which means I've spent countless hours appreciating the serenity of my home office overlooking the garden I've lovingly cultivated since my divorce 3 years ago. That garden became my therapy, my meditation, my sanctuary. The house next door had been empty for 6 months after old Mr. Henderson passed away. His family finally sold it in March, and I'd been cautiously optimistic about new neighbors. The sold sign came down 2 weeks ago, and I'd caught glimpses of a woman in her 40s directing a moving truck with the precision of a military general. She had that particular brand of confidence that immediately made me nervous, the kind that suggests someone who's never heard the word no and wouldn't recognize it if it was tattooed on their forehead. But the power tools at dawn? That was my first real introduction to Karen Pemberton. I threw on a robe and stepped outside, following the mechanical screaming to its source. There she was, auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail that somehow managed to look both athletic and aggressive, wearing designer workout clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She was operating a circular saw with the confidence of someone who'd watched exactly one YouTube tutorial and considered herself an expert. "Excuse me," I called over the noise, which she either didn't hear or chose to ignore. "Excuse me." The line saw finally went quiet, and she looked up with eyes that were the color of steel and twice as cold. "Oh, you must be the neighbor." She said it like I was a pleasant surprise rather than someone whose morning peace she just obliterated. "I'm Karen Pemberton. I'm building something amazing." "It's not even 7 in the morning," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "There are noise ordinances." "Are there?" She tilted her head with faux curiosity. "Well, I'm sure they don't apply to improvement projects. I'm adding value to the whole neighborhood." That's when I noticed what she was actually doing. She had measurements spray-painted across her backyard in fluorescent orange, and wooden posts were being assembled with the methodical precision of someone following a plan. A plan that, I was beginning to realize with growing horror, extended well beyond the boundaries of her own property. "What exactly are you building?" I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want the answer. "A zipline," she announced with the enthusiasm of someone revealing they'd won the lottery. "For my kids. Well, for everyone, really. It's going to be spectacular." I followed her gaze as she gestured toward my yard, and my blood turned to ice water. She wasn't just planning to build a zipline on her property. The trajectory she'd mapped out started from a massive oak tree in her backyard and ended at another oak tree that was definitely, unmistakably, undeniably on my side of the property line. "That tree is on my property," I said, pointing to the end point of her planned aerial highway. "Is it?" She squinted at the tree like she was genuinely confused, though I could see the calculations behind her eyes. "Well, trees don't really belong to anyone, do they? They're part of nature. The tree that's growing in my yard that I've been caring for, that drops leaves I have to rake, that tree belongs to me." Karen laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of broken glass. "Don't be silly. Besides, think about how fun this will be. Your property value will skyrocket with this kind of amenity nearby." I spent the next 20 minutes explaining property, lines, easements, and the basic concept of asking permission before involving someone else's land in your construction projects. Karen listened with the patient expression of someone waiting for a toddler to finish their tantrum, nodding at appropriate intervals while clearly not processing a single word. "I'll tell you what," she said when I finally ran out of steam. "I'll make sure the kids are quiet when they use it, no screaming or anything. How's that for compromise?" That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, Karen had transformed into a one-woman construction crew with the determination of someone possessed. Every morning brought new power tools, new deliveries of lumber and hardware, and new evidence that she was absolutely completely ignoring everything I'd said about property boundaries. She'd installed a platform 15 feet up her oak tree and had begun stringing heavy-duty cable toward mine. I tried reasoning with her 4 more times. I tried appealing to her sense of neighborly courtesy. I even printed out the county property records showing exactly where her land ended and mine began. Karen treated each interaction like I was a minor inconvenience, the way you might acknowledge a mosquito before swatting it away. "You worry too much," became her standard response to any concern I raised. "Everything will be fine. You'll see." But everything was not fine. The zipline platform in her tree had grown into an elaborate, multi-level structure that looked like something between a treehouse and a telecommunications tower. She'd installed floodlights that turned on automatically at sunset, flooding both our yards with the harsh white glare of a prison yard. The cable she was stringing was thick enough to anchor a small ship, and she'd begun excavating what looked suspiciously like a foundation pad directly under my oak tree. The morning I discovered she'd driven metal stakes into my tree trunk to anchor her cable system was the morning I called the county. Property dispute? The clerk sounded bored. "You'll need to file a formal complaint. Takes about 6 to 8 weeks to process." 6 to 8 weeks? She's building on my property right now. "Is anyone in immediate danger?" I looked out my window at Karen, who was now wearing a hard hat and installing what appeared to be a zipline brake system involving pulleys, springs, and enough mechanical complexity to land a small aircraft. "I'm not sure," I said honestly. "Call us back if someone gets hurt. Otherwise, file the paperwork." The police were even less helpful. "It's a civil matter," Officer Rodriguez explained when he arrived to take my complaint. "Unless she's threatening you or damaging your property in a way that creates an immediate hazard, we can't really intervene in neighbor disputes about construction. She's literally building on my land." "Has she damaged anything, broken anything, destroyed any of your property?" I had to admit she hadn't. The stakes in my tree were actually quite professionally installed, and she'd been careful not to damage the bark. Her floodlights were on her own property, even if they illuminated mine like a football stadium. The foundation pad she was preparing was perfectly positioned to avoid any of my landscaping. "Look," Rodriguez said, clearly wanting to wrap this. "Hubs must maybe try talking to her again. Sometimes these things work themselves out." That night, I lay awake listening to Karen's construction project continuing under the glare of her floodlights. The woman apparently didn't believe in normal human concepts like daytime or reasonable hours. I could hear her out there, with what sounded like an industrial drill, punctuated by the occasional satisfied "perfect" or "that'll hold." By morning, the zipline was complete. It was, I had to admit, an impressive piece of engineering. The cable stretched taut between the 2 trees, maybe 30 feet off the ground at its highest point, sloping down to about 15 feet where it terminated at my oak tree. She'd installed a proper landing platform, complete with safety rails and what looked like genuine zipline equipment, professional grade harnesses, pulleys, and brake systems. Karen emerged from her house at 8 a.m. sharp, wearing athletic gear and a helmet that probably cost more than most people's cars. She was followed by 2 kids I hadn't seen before, a boy who looked about 12 and a girl maybe 10 years old. Both were wearing expensive outdoor gear and expressions of excitement that suggested they had no idea their mother had just committed what amounted to aerial trespassing. "Isn't this amazing?" Karen called over to me as I stood in my backyard, coffee mug in hand, watching this invasion of my airspace with fascination and horror. "The kids are going to love it." "You built it anyway," I said. "Of course I did. I told you it would be wonderful." The boy stepped into the harness first, and I had to admit he looked like he knew what he was doing. Karen had clearly invested in proper safety equipment and training. He launched himself from the platform with a whoop of joy that could probably be heard 3 blocks away, zipping along the cable at what looked like genuinely dangerous speeds before engaging the brake system and coming to a controlled stop at the landing platform, in my tree, on my property. "Mom, this is incredible," he shouted. "I know, sweetie. Your turn, Madison." The girl was more cautious, taking her time to check her equipment and get comfortable with the harness. When she finally pushed off, her ride was more controlled, more careful, but her delighted laughter as she sailed through the air was infectious despite my irritation. And that's when I realized Karen's true genius. She hadn't just built a zipline. She'd built a zipline that was so obviously fun, so clearly exciting, so... Karen's scream was followed by a silence so profound I could hear birds chirping 3 blocks away. Then came the sound of her sliding glass door slamming open with enough force to rattle windows, followed by the staccato rhythm of expensive athletic shoes marching across wet grass with military precision. I didn't have to look to know she was heading straight for my back door. The pounding started at 8:03 a.m. Not knocking, pounding, the kind of aggressive hammering usually reserved for police raids or emergency situations. "Marcus!" Karen's voice carried the particular pitch that suggested she was operating somewhere beyond normal human emotional ranges. "Marcus Chen, get out here right now!" I took my time answering, partly because I was genuinely curious about how long she could maintain that volume, and partly because I wanted to savor this moment. After 3 weeks of watching Karen steamroll over property rights, neighborhood courtesy, and basic human decency, seeing her finally encounter a consequence she couldn't dismiss or ignore felt like Christmas morning. When I finally opened the door, Karen was standing on my deck wearing yesterday's construction clothes, her usually perfect ponytail askew, and an expression that could have curdled milk at 50 paces. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Good morning, Karen. I modified the zipline." "You what?" "I modified your zipline. The part that was on my property without my permission. I made it safer, actually. That landing pad is rated for extreme sports. Professional grade." Karen's face went through a fascinating spectrum of colors, settling somewhere between volcanic red and eggplant purple. You can't just cut someone's zipline." "I can if it's on my property." But, she gestured wildly toward the modified setup, where my professional landing pad sat like a giant marshmallow below the now shortened cable. "The kids! What about the kids?" "They'll have a much softer landing now. That pad cost me $800. You're welcome." For a moment, I thought Karen might actually have a stroke. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, no sound emerging, while her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides. This is sabotage," she finally managed. "This is property management. Would you like some coffee? You look stressed." That's when Karen made her first mistake. Instead of recognizing that she'd finally met someone who wouldn't be bulldozed by her aggressive confidence, she doubled down. "Fine," she declared. "Fine. If that's how you want to play this game, Marcus Chen, then game on." She spun on her heel and marched back toward her house with the determined stride of someone about to do something phenomenally stupid. I should have been more concerned about that threat. Instead, I was actually looking forward to whatever Karen had in mind. After weeks of dealing with her entitled behavior, the prospect of a proper neighbor war held a certain appeal. Besides, what was the worst she could do? I got my answer at 3:47 p.m. The delivery truck was the first sign something was wrong. Not just any delivery truck, a specialized vehicle with aquatic solutions emblazoned on the side in cheerful blue letters. It was followed by another truck marked Rapid Pool Installation, then another labeled Premium Landscaping Services. By 4:15 p.m., Karen's backyard looked like the staging area for a major construction project. Men in hard hats were unloading equipment, surveying her yard, and having intense conversations involving clipboards, measuring tapes, and frequent gestures toward my property. At 4:30 p.m., Karen emerged from her house wearing a business suit that probably cost more than my car, her hair restored to its usual aggressive perfection. She was carrying a folder thick enough to choke a horse and wearing the smile of someone about to ruin someone else's day. She walked directly to the property line and called out, "Marcus, could you come out here for a moment? I have something exciting to share." Against my better judgment, I stepped outside. "I wanted to thank you for inspiring me," Karen announced with the enthusiasm of a game show host. "Your little stunt this morning made me realize I wasn't thinking big enough." She opened her folder and pulled out what appeared to be architectural plans, professional ones. "I'm having a pool installed," she declared, "Olympic-sized, with a diving platform that will make my zipline even more exciting." She held up the plans, and my blood slowly turned to ice water as I realized what she was showing me. Karen wasn't just having a pool installed. She was having a pool installed that extended to within 3 feet of our shared property line. The diving platform she'd designed was positioned to create a perfect zipline trajectory. Riders would launch from her tree, sail across both our yards, and splash down into her new pool instead of landing on my inflatable pad. The best part, Karen continued with malicious glee, is that my new zipline will be completely on my property. The cable will start at my tree and end at my new diving platform. No more property line issues. I stared at the plans, trying to process the scope of what she was proposing. The pool was massive, easily 40 feet long and 20 feet wide. The diving platform extended upward like a tower, with multiple levels and what appeared to be professional diving equipment. "How much is this costing you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Does it matter? I can afford it." Karen's smile had taken on a predatory quality. "The pool company promises they can have it installed in 10 days. Rush job, of course, but money talks." That's when I noticed the detail that made my stomach drop. The pool's positioning wasn't just about the zip line. Karen had oriented it so that the deep end would be directly adjacent to our property line, right next to my carefully cultivated garden. Which meant that when she had pool parties, and Karen was absolutely the type of person who would have loud, crowded pool parties, the noise would funnel directly toward my home office window. "There's more," Karen continued, clearly enjoying my expression. "I'm having them install underwater speakers, color-changing LED lights, and a hot tub section. The kids are going to love it. The whole neighborhood will." She wasn't just building a pool. She was building a suburban water park designed to maximize noise, activity, and chaos while staying technically within her property rights. It was brilliant in its vindictiveness. "The permit must have cost a fortune to rush through," I said. "Money well spent. Besides, I made some friends at the planning office. Amazing what a plate of homemade cookies and some charm can accomplish." Of course she had. Karen had probably waltzed into the municipal building, deployed her aggressive friendliness on some overworked clerk, and emerged with permits that would normally take months to process. "Construction starts tomorrow," she announced. "I hope you don't mind the noise. It should only last about 2 weeks. 2 weeks of construction noise, followed by a lifetime of pool parties, zipline screaming, and the constant knowledge that Karen had successfully escalated our conflict into something resembling suburban warfare." That night, I sat in my living room, staring out at Karen's backyard where she'd positioned floodlights to illuminate the construction zone. Even at 11 p.m., she had workers doing preparatory work, marking utilities and setting up equipment for the morning assault. I had to admit, I was impressed. In a single day, Karen had managed to turn my clever zipline modification into the opening move of what was shaping up to be an epic neighbor battle. She'd found a way to not only restore her zipline, but upgrade it into something bigger, louder, and more intrusive than the original. But Karen had made one crucial error in her planning. She'd assumed I was done. At 6 a.m. the next morning, I made a phone call to my brother-in-law David, who happens to be a commercial contractor specializing in problematic projects. "Marcus, everything okay? You never call this early." "I need a favor, David. A big one. How quickly can you install a swimming pool?" There was a pause. "You want a pool? Since when?" "Since my neighbor decided to turn our property line into a water park. Can you beat a 10-day installation timeline?" David laughed. "Marcus, I've been waiting years for you to finally decide to live a little. How big are we talking?" "Bigger than hers." "Hers?" "It's complicated. Can you come over today and take a look at the space?" "I'll be there in 2 hours. This sounds like it's going to be interesting." By 8:30 a.m., David was standing in my backyard with his measuring tape, surveying the available space with the professional eye of someone who'd built pools in more challenging locations than suburban backyards. "You've got good space to work with," he said. "Better drainage than most residential lots. How big did you say your neighbor's pool is going to be?" 40 by 20 with a diving platform." David grinned. "We can do 50 by 25 with a proper diving area and a separate spa section. Natural stone coping, infinity edge on the side facing her property, really make a statement." "How fast?" "For you? 8 days, but it's going to cost." "I don't care what it costs." That's how I found myself standing in my backyard at 9 a.m., watching two separate construction crews prepare to install competing swimming pools separated by about 20 feet of property line. Karen emerged from her house at 9:15, took one look at my construction crew, and marched over with the expression of someone who'd just discovered their chess opponent had been hiding the fact that they were a grandmaster. "What is this?" she demanded. "Pool installation," I said cheerfully. "I was so inspired by your project I decided to get one too."